Why is shame such a powerful emotion? How does it affect us mentally, physically, emotionally? I'm Nadia Davis. I'm a mom, author, attorney, and Kundalini yoga teacher who has experienced public shaming that brought me to my knees. On this podcast, I'm going to tell you how I'm living the work taking shame out of the shadows. I'll give you real-life advice and skills to take away with you throughout your day. You'll hear from powerful guests who have overcome trauma and emerged stronger than ever. You too can ban the shame within and around you. Join me. You are not alone. Hi, everyone, and welcome home. Welcome to Home is Within You, where we transform shame into power. And why do we do that? Because in my personal experience and in observing other people, I've learned that shame is society's and the mind's biggest weapon to separate us from each other and from our true selves, and the biggest obstacle when we're on a healing journey. Today, I'm super excited because we have the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice representative with us, Jessie Kohler. And I can't remember how our roads crossed, other than I must have seen something online and was just, right up the same alley. I'm a big advocate against, um, judging and shaming of people's responses to pain, especially trauma. And so any way that we can fulfill their mission, which is, quote, preventing and mitigating trauma and adversity, as well as promoting resiliency, recovery, healing, and growth so that all are supported to flourish and thrive. Now, their vision is amazing. And so specifically, it states trauma-informed, resilience-building, healing-centered, prevention-oriented, and community-led approaches benefit us all. So we're going to dive into what is trauma-informed policies and practices, what the community work and policy work of CTIPP is, and begin with a little bit of information about its leader, Jessie Kohler. And I'm always interested in knowing what brings folks to this kind of work. I just got to say, trauma-informed policies and practices across the gamut in all systems that I used to call, when I was executive director of the Family Justice Center, my boss and the ER director that worked with us from Highland Hospital called it ports of entry. Wherever there's like a port of entry for a survivor, it could be anywhere. It could be the bus stop, it could be the grocery store. But most importantly, when it's in a government agency, so the police or a hospital, or a private doctor's office, there's so many different layers. We hope that there's trauma-informed responses and not kind of an immediate judgment first and foremost, but a kind of holistic human view of what this person might be going through. And the goal, yes, is human compassion and change and healing, but it also really determines efficiency of all the funds that we contribute and that we dedicate to helping people reduce the violence in their lives and heal. And when we have that more human approach, I believe that there's more efficiency and collaboration. So right here, right now, we have my son who just came in here. And so I am going to pause a second. So Jessie Kohler, who just met my son who's sick home from school. he's on loan serving as CTIP's executive director. What does that mean?
So I am not paid by the organization. The organization, as a
Oh,
startup,
okay.
has invested in other staff capacity. So our wonderful vision that you talked about was written by my colleague Whitney Maris, who's a
Okay.
part-time staff person. I started another nonprofit, the Change Campaign, that does other work in addition to supporting the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice in my role as executive director. But on loan creates capacity for our currently limited resources and funds to be
That's
directed to build the team instead of just going to me.
that's beautiful. So that's how the collaboration happens. It's a whole bunch of organizations coming together for CTIP's goal and vision. And so the word on loan, that's what that means. That's beautiful.
Essentially, yeah. And we hope to become, it's an independent 501c3 nonprofit. We hope to be able to have a full-time team over time, but it
Mhm.
has been remarkably helpful, a collaborative effort to help
Mhm.
launch the organization to where
Mhm.
it is now compared to a few years ago when we first got funding, compared to 2015 when the organization was first founded.
I'm loving this. Okay. So Jesse is in charge of organizational administration and HR, fundraising, strategic planning, public engagements, and working to create conditions of safety and empowerment for the entire team and volunteers in their roles in the organization. So the change campaign. So the change campaign is he's on loan from them, and this collaboration is just this is where social change happens.
Yeah.
The, so do you want to explain a little bit about how you got into this work and the initial stages of developing CTIP, the motivation behind your personal work and its creation?
Yeah, yeah. So two different stories that came together in, I believe, a wonderful way. For me, I've been blessed to come from a family that loves me unconditionally, and
Mm.
a community that was able to provide resources and supports for me during some very traumatic and trying times in my early life. I had an eating disorder where I had choked on a piece of food and was unable to eat solid food for 4 months at the age of 13, um, and would just have anxiety
Oh,
attacks and really struggled through that. As I emerged through the supports and love that I had from the community around me, I
oh,
had another, probably the most, it, I don't mean to compare trauma here, but in my mind, it's the most traumatic moment was when I was 15. My best friend passed away in a plane crash suddenly,
wow.
and that was an incredibly traumatic moment for myself, my family, the community at large, and had a lot of supports and resources. Again, struggled a lot, but was also lifted up and saw the promise of the ways in which relationships can lead to healing over time from some of life's most trying moments. And had other highs. I mean, those are two trials that I had, but also had triumphs in sports and school, socially. And fast forwarding, when I graduated from college in 2016, I joined a nonprofit organization called 12 Plus that worked in public high schools in Philadelphia, and
Mhm.
I saw the ways in which there was so much more, disproportionately more adversity faced
Mhm.
by the students that I worked with and in the communities that I was working in, with far fewer resources and supports to promote healing. And so I
Right.
recognized how lucky I was, and I got and really saw my privilege in a number of ways, and saw my a potential role for myself as helping to transform the education system to
Mhm.
better support people in reaching their full potential. And so I got a master's in educational leadership, and during that year, I had an internship with the Pennsylvania Office of Attorney General to help create the Pennsylvania Trauma Informed Care Network. And that was my
That was
introduction to
through
trauma
the
informed care.
Attorney General's office.
And yeah, it was an
Wow.
internship with my master's program. And that was when I was introduced to CTIPP.
And
Um,
so was that a program of the AG's office?
the master's in educational leadership. No, so I just while I was in my master's program, I met the executive deputy attorney general for the Office of Public Engagement, who was
Mm-hmm.
helping to develop the Pennsylvania, what we called at the time, the Pennsylvania Trauma Informed Care Network.
Okay.
And
I thank you so much for sharing all of this. And I want to stop you because it's so brave and amazing to hear you put into words a human experience of that process when you were a child. And so I want to ask you, we drag feelings, we drag shame in particular out of the shadows. And so for you, as a little boy, can you tap into and describe the initial feelings of your feelings make you defective, your health situation with the eating challenges, the secret belief that you were defective? How did shame show up that way?
yeah, I remember with the eating disorder, I don't, I just remember being different. I don't remember shame showing up as ever presently as it did after Doug passed away. When,
So shame, I've learned through Dr.
yeah,
Polter, it isn't like, this is the thing. It's not like I feel ashamed. It's actually like a belief something is wrong with us. Dr. Polter explains it's a belief that we are incompetent or defective. And so versus,
yeah,
oh, I have this condition and it doesn't change my worth or this part of me. Does that relate at all?
yeah. I remember not being able to eat. Like, it's not like I didn't, I wanted to eat. I
Mhm.
had vicious anxiety attacks, like when food was near my mouth, because it would re-trigger or reactivate that memory of choking. I would be unable to eat solid food. So all that I could do was drink and Ensure.
I
In the
see.
process of my body and mind trying to save itself from that traumatic memory, I was doing massive harm. I was putting myself in incredible risk. And the ways in which I interacted with that fear, I felt different. I felt like something was wrong with me. I mean, something was
That's
wrong.
it. Yeah.
The you know, I wish that I had understood at that time brain states, and that I was being taken out of my cortex, my critical thinking part of my brain, and overly activated in my midbrain into um,
Survival mode.
that. Yeah, just trying to survive, and overly activated perhaps in the limbic system, which you know, at 13 years old, when you're a young boy in the Jewish community at that point, I was a young man, and
Mhm.
you know, to be as emotional as I was, there was um, again just that feeling of different. And I remember,
And we can't understate, I mean, this is massive, this state of anxiety because of something in your brain and body that was out of your control,
mhm,
and that state of that was the existence in your mind and your body, and the feeling that something's wrong clearly manifested in anxiety, intense. So that's
tremendous
how
fear.
it seems it showed up for you,
Yeah,
that belief of defectiveness in anxiety, major.
and again, I was so fortunate to have family camp
Mhm.
counselors who It was over the summer months, but friends who loved me and supported me
Now, did the
through
label
that
of
time.
like you have an eating disorder, did people say call it an eating disorder even though it
I had a
was?
therapist that labeled it as anorexia, which always
Hmm.
yeah. So that label from a clinical perspective was put onto it, anorexia nervosa.
Now
And then I
that's
remember with the labeling, again,
right.
like the shame really emerged in different ways for me after Doug passed.
Okay.
In the school system, where I struggled to engage with schools. School, I was best friends with Doug from the time that we were like 3 or 4 until he passed away when we were 15. And so being in school was activating for me. It made me just think of Doug and our time together and miss him. I felt his absence. And I struggled to engage with school curriculum as much. I was dealing with much bigger questions. I think there might have been some additional sensitivity from the eating disorder about questions of life and death at that
Mm.
age. And I remember the school system. I got labeled and diagnosed at 15 with ADHD, depression. Sort of this moment in time became a label that stuck with me for over a decade. And um, I remember my mom being an incredible advocate for me, where the school system was at one point when I was struggling, talked to my mom and said, Jesse may not, like, this school may not be the best place for Jesse right now. And my mom said he needs those relationships. He needs to be in the place that he's called home. I was so lucky to have an advocate like that in my corner, because if I had lost my other friends too, I don't know what would have happened. But that shame and labeling that came about because of a horrific accident and moment and traumatic part in my life, that response that brought about be like conditions and thoughts of shame and I'm different and there's something wrong with me, when I was just dealing with, we were all dealing in different ways with
Hmm.
tragedy and grief and trauma. um that I think also played a role in that initial step of my career toward the education system, of I know that we can understand and support students better to reach their full potential.
That
And then
that was the birth of the passion of this change you envisioned.
I think so.
And the
And
opposite of what I hear you saying is the opposite of the the label and this literal interpretation of a human experience from everything on the outside your body. The opposite of that was your mother knowing this human being and soul that she brought to this world, and her advocacy speaking on your soul's behalf, like he needs this connection. That so what a beautiful example of the extremes.
yeah, it was that love. And, there are other examples, but like I said at the beginning, I come from a family that is deeply rooted in unconditional love. And to have that support has been the greatest antidote to the shame and trauma
Yes.
that I've experienced.
And was the road to get you eventually, tell me how that process was after the tragedy to
Oh,
that
so
healing.
it was so in addition to my mom's advocacy, I've got to give, my dad was also my baseball coach, and baseball for me, it was something that I had to look
Mm.
forward to during the eating disorder, during the after Doug passed away. It was something that even in the darkest of times gave me an escape, something that I could look forward to, which
Mhm.
was so important. And an assistant coach who coached with my dad, Well, let me take a step back. After Doug passed away, I had recurring nightmares that I was on the plane with him and I couldn't sleep. I really, really struggled, which had cascading impacts, of course. And so I wasn't sleeping. I was really struggling. I was gaining weight. I was sort of hermiting within my house when I wasn't at school and there wasn't
Hmm.
baseball. And an assistant coach who I had known for many years, who had also coached us in basketball when I played with Doug and his son. But Coach Felix saw that I was struggling and he invited me to work out in the mornings with the wrestling team. And I wasn't a wrestler. I've never wrestled in my life, but it gave me something to do early in the mornings. And the process of getting physically stronger, the process of that repetitive behavior actually created neural pathways. I didn't know it at the time, but it was
Hmm.
creating healthy neural pathways and giving me something to do. And I was more prepared going into school. I had gotten a lot of energy out. And
Hmm.
then by the end of the day, I had become so exhausted that I started to sleep through the night. And over the next 2 years, so
Mm.
after a year of, I will say, deep depression and a lot of struggling, I still struggled, but that was an opportunity, a non-clinical opportunity. I also had a therapist who I continued to see, and there were clinical supports as well for me. But I really think that that non-clinical opportunity of growing stronger and getting seeing transformation within myself, being able to
Hmm.
prepare better for baseball, which again was that thing that I so looked forward to and loved, that led to a process of post traumatic growth and post traumatic wisdom that enabled an integration of sorts that as I stepped into my career, and we'll get into CTIP in a bit, but as we've done the work, has allowed for me to integrate my experiences in a very powerful way of the horrible sides of trauma, as well as the wonderful sides of love and healing and support that I know is possible if our society prioritizes it, that
Yes.
allows for us to move through tremendously stressful times and a lot of adversity, and not as broken people, as a part of life.
You
And
are speaking exactly what my heart is dedicated to doing in the world. And I'm so happy that we connected. Your story is amazing. And what I heard you explain is this journey where you were allowed, because of the love around you, to find a sense. It was the beginning of like almost a spiritual path to find your identity and your personal understanding of your, for lack of a better word, your ego, I like baseball. I am a baseball player. And you owned it versus this label, and how powerful that is, just like the overall arching love you had around you and your mom, how powerful that identity growth as well as the love counteracted the label, the outside stuff that was going on. And then you very eloquently explained, then it overlapped with the psychological and the physical, and you're sleeping, and the psychological. So that's the power of love. And that's the power of having a safe and calm space to sit in and develop our own identity, our own truth, and connect with it. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I I then, when you started in baseball, and then where did you go, what were your studies, and how did you end up, especially at such a young age, with such impactful work? It's awesome.
yeah, I appreciate all of that. And I feel so fortunate to tell my story. And again, I know we'll get to it a little bit more in a bit, but We all have stories, and when we feel safe enough, and not everybody needs to share their stories, and there are a number of reasons why some
Right.
folks prefer not to on mass scales. I mean, we all have should feel conditions of empowerment and safety to control our own narratives. But what we
Thank
hope to
you
do
for
with
saying
CTIPP
that.
is weave a fabric of stories of diverse lived experiences and community contexts that help us generate a stronger society moving forward. And so I'll just throw that out there really quickly. My technical major in college was
Mhm.
law and society. I had my real major, I think, was more baseball. I played college baseball at
Oh,
Oberlin,
that's great.
but that doesn't count as a major, at least not at Oberlin.
Oh, no, no,
And
that's
so
great. Where?
Oberlin's a small school in Ohio.
Oh, that's great.
So yeah, have a lot of love for that school and that community beyond just the school.
What's your favorite team today?
I am a
I
Philadelphia
figured.
sports fanatic.
That's great.
I love Philadelphia Phillies. Have a special place in my heart. Um,
Awesome.
yeah, unapologetically.
So you were playing baseball and then in your
And
studies, what
and
and
so the one other big traumatic moment that I didn't get to for me was at the end of my sophomore year of college. I was actually arrested for something that I didn't do, and it was a really traumatizing moment that there was a lot of shame there that echoes in many ways um, the stigma that I felt in high school just from something that people saw as my fault that again I knew I was innocent of, and so that was something. But having wanted to be
wow.
an attorney, I come from a family. My grandfather was an attorney in Philadelphia. A lot of my other family members are attorneys, and so I figured that if baseball didn't work out for me, I would end up being involved in the law
Right.
and be an attorney at some level. And after that moment, I saw a different side of the justice system that I think really made me curious in a different way about my privilege. And also, the silver lining of it all was that I had court mandated community service at a nonprofit organization called Oberlin Community Services. And
So let me
that,
stop you.
mhm.
This is amazing. And in Home is Within You is the story of Arthur Carmona, who was a wrongfully convicted youth who eventually was freed. But it talks about I can't believe that you went through that. The internal struggle he must have gone through, you must have gone through with being innocent, yet having everything around you saying otherwise. The strength that you had to get through that connected to your truth and your knowing, um, to even find that strength during that time
I
with is incredible.
Yeah, there it wasn't all strength for sure. There at many times in my life there was a tremendous amount of struggle. Again, the outlet.
Of
So
course,
anyway, that moment really made me question. I didn't want to be an
your
attorney
purpose,
anymore. I saw
your
I it
your
wasn't
purpose,
the
doubting the
story,
system.
but
Yeah,
that outlet of Oberlin Community Services (OCS), a
yes.
nonprofit that was serving the broader community. That there were food deserts, a lot of rural poverty out in Ohio, and over the next 2 years, I became I developed a position as the public health advocate.
Mhm.
But it went from 25 hours of court mandated community service to
To
I don't know how many, probably like a couple thousand hours of
you
volunteerism.
totally, literally transformed something into an amazingly beautiful thing.
I found purpose with others,
Yes.
right? I found purpose in community and being able to use sometimes my physical strength, stocking shelves at the food cupboard,
Mhm.
the resources that I had at college, the academic privilege that I had in supporting educational work, helping to write grants for a Text for Wellness program, I got to do all that. And that was actually where the change campaign was born.
So let
Um,
me stop you
yeah.
because
Sorry,
we can
I'm going
talk
down a rabbit
about
hole
all
there.
the no, no, you're not. I love it. I, I'm for listeners to know how you ended up transitioning to this purposeful work and creating it. When I mean, I'm sure anger came up, when fear for the future, when all those different challenging feelings came up and the ups and downs, um, you know, that's a whole story, a whole interview, but we struggle during those things.
Yeah.
And was it the love around you and then the community sense that opposed those dark moments, and how did you like get through that, and did you tell yourself it is okay that there's ups and downs?
So
Share a little bit about the reality of the
yeah,
struggle to get there.
yeah. So it's not like I just developed these healthy coping mechanisms. Like after I got arrested, I really struggled with pot and alcohol, and was not like doing well all the time. Right. I found purpose, I think, in being able to serve community that gave me something to look forward to in a different way.
And thus loving yourself more.
And
Is it
then again
reciprocal?
had yeah, and having the family of like just that unconditional love, that like truly deep natured love, that I felt supported even during the toughest times. And that doesn't mean that it was always easy, right? Like
Right.
it was tough, and
But you
um
knew it was
but
there and
and
present,
exactly, I didn't
even
feel
when you were
alone.
beating yourself up. Okay.
And we talk about how
Wow.
healing happens in the context of healthy relationships over time. And so to have those relational buffers and people in the community, people at the school who I felt less isolated from, definitely helped. And
Okay.
it was over time, actually, I about 11 months after the arrest, I think one of the transformative moments for me was I had a really bad concussion. I had gotten hit in the head with a baseball. And in that isolation where I couldn't look at screens, I wasn't allowed to go to class, normal concussion protocol, very limited engagement outside of getting meals. I had it was a time to pause and reflect on where I had gone in
Mhm.
my life and where I wanted to go from there,
Mhm.
recognizing that I couldn't change the past. And in that time, I think differently than I had before, I found compassion and grace for myself, and that love for myself, not just in serving others, but just intrinsic to being, as I believed other people were worthy of love. I found that
For
for
yourself.
myself from myself, and sort of directed a narrative of where, given the reality of what my life had become at that point, where it could go. And
You
I
were
think that
on your own side.
and that's where that advocacy part, that's where um having learned about the brokenness of our systems and becoming more of, social justice oriented and really wanting to promote liberty and justice for everyone, deeply held values. I found avenues and opportunities to start to instill that. And so Oberlin Community Services, again, launched the Change campaign to fundraise for OCS originally. It's now its own nonprofit that
That
I run. But
began as part of Overland community.
so that was where it started. Yeah.
Okay.
And then
Beautiful.
got involved. Yeah. Just
The
over
change
time.
campaign.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
then
say more.
about the Change campaign.
Yeah.
So originally it was just, it's really hard to be a nonprofit, to not work with money. And so after we had written We wrote a grant, or I helped to write a grant. Other people really led the process, but it was a Text for Wellness program to the office, to Ohio's Office of, or off, a Commission on Minority Health. Um, and it raised $50,000. Within my head, like, if at Oberlin, the thought was if we could gather an average of $20 per student, that would create $60,000 in revenue for Oberlin Community Services each year. It was an opportunity for the school to support the community
Mm-hmm.
in general operating support instead of just programmatic funds. And so the change campaign started as an effort to raise literal coins like change
Mm-hmm.
all across
Oh,
campus,
I
have
see.
departments compete against each other. And as I continued on through my career at 12 Plus, the Attorney General's office, I served as director of development at a community center in Philadelphia after my master's program, while serving as a board member when CTIPP was an all volunteer organization before becoming the executive director for CTIPP. The change campaign just kept evolving
So
through
you had this
time.
identity and belief in your true self that was fueled by this advocate part of you that believed change, positive change could happen. And that just kept driving you. Did you run into walls where the arrest would come up or, you know, did what you kept
Yeah,
moving forward? It's
I
beautiful.
was fortunate with the arrest that it was a low grade
Okay.
arrest. We settled, so it
Okay.
got expunged, and so that was
Okay.
more once it got expunged as I navigated my career. That was not an obstacle, but there were obstacles every step of the way. Whether it was that I still run into obstacles if I'm too young and
Mhm.
inexperienced.
Yeah, I was gonna
There's
say we're
obstacles
like, you
every.
sound like my twin, but you're much younger. You know, but okay, so then CTIP,
Yeah,
we're gonna have to do another
yeah. I'm
interview
sorry,
on
I
it,
went on
but
a
I'm
whole rant about
no,
most.
I want to know the goal, the mission right now of CTIP. I mean, the campaign for trauma-informed policies and practices is the child of part of your story. And
Uh,
today, what is it and how can people get involved? And then I have a question for you.
Yeah, so CTIP was founded by a lot of leaders in the trauma informed movement. When I was still in college, folks recognized that there were two big needs. There was a missing advocacy voice around
Yes.
trauma informed policy, and recognizing that government systems could do a much better job of investing in root causes that were driving costs and inefficiencies throughout our systems. And that was
Because
one piece. And the
you were
other
giving
side
me
is
chills.
that
Yes.
the other side is that there was, even within the trauma informed movement, there was so much siloing going on. Work in trauma informed education, work in trauma informed healthcare, work in the criminal legal system. There was,
Mm-hmm.
and many others, but there wasn't a body that held a comprehensive vision of what a truly trauma informed society could look like. So when you mention,
You're absolutely right. There were so many trailblazers and leaders, one of them being Nancy O'Malley, whose episode was released last Friday. She was the former Alameda County District Attorney, but a national victims' rights advocate, and there's so many unsung heroes whose vision is just amazing for more trauma-informed investigations, policies, cross-examination, whatever it might be. But you're saying the wording of the vision and the mission, an umbrella that we are all standing for this and advocating for this wasn't present.
for the whole movement across all silos and systems.
Okay.
Collaboration is a necessary principle of a trauma
Okay.
informed approach, and so how we coordinate and align across different agencies and systems
Love it.
becomes really important to a trauma informed approach. And so that was where
Okay.
CTIP was was birthed, and then we were unfunded for 6 years, before the pandemic made it impossible to ignore any longer the need to fundamentally reorient the way that our systems operate.
Okay.
And so now, as we've continued to grow, and there are so many founders and folks who have contributed to this movement and the organization and the work, who deserve to be recognized and spoken, every single one of them. But the work has become, from our team, our board, our volunteer network, and advocates all across the country in every state, really focused on developing trauma-informed approaches to advocacy. So in addition to advocating for trauma-informed legislation, and different people have different interests based on their own lived experiences, both professional and personal, we know that it's so important to be congruent with a trauma-informed approach while we are promoting trauma-informed approaches in the
Mm-hmm.
world. And so we're really trying to build an infrastructure to support the development of an advocacy network that serves as a foundation for which diverse lived experiences and community contexts can come together
Mm-hmm.
and work to co-create
So
a
it's
better
bringing the
future.
language, it's changing the approach and thinking
Yeah, yeah.
in
And
all
then,
systems. I
yep,
call it spiritual advocacy. It's like a human approach. It's if we're advocating for our own truth and human experience,
yeah.
then we can see that in others. But you're taking that vision through communities and through legislative bodies. How else to
And then,
it's changing the language, right? And the
yeah, so
thinking.
the advocacy, the policy work is definitely more of a top-down approach. And then we also have a
Okay.
bottom-up approach where we are supporting the development of what we call community-led, cross-systems, trauma-informed, prevention-oriented, resilience-building, healing-focused, and sustainability oriented systems and
Hmm.
coalitions that drive the work in communities at the state level, and working to develop a network that is not just advocating for policy, but also integrating trauma informed approaches into the community fabric
I
through a
see.
grassroots approach, and working to develop a bi directional flow through
So it's
which,
introducing this vision, and then if they were to adopt it in their own mission and policies, both from private, like nonprofits all over the nation, and government, law enforcement, is that it? So if somebody is changing, adding trauma informed, then they become part of the network?
yeah, our goal is to
Okay.
create sort of a movement building where, the coalitions are specifically, community led sort of coalitions. A lot of times that is nonprofit backed. Sometimes it's less formally developed. Sometimes it can come out of a government agency, especially at state levels. We
Hmm.
see a lot of governmental support in some states. There are even community
But what
networks.
is support? What is considered a success or change? Is it a change in their, for example, requirements for investigations, or what is considered
It it
a
depends.
progress? Okay.
Yeah, so it depends. It can be, and there's a lot of work in the criminal legal system. Um, you know,
Educating.
yeah, the education system. I think that one of in that cross systems approach,
Hmm.
there's a really well documented example called the self healing communities model that was done
Hmm.
in Washington State through the Family Policy Council, that invested in a network of these cross sector coalitions in several dozen communities
Hmm.
around the state that opted in to work with this program. And over a 17-year period, they, through trauma informed approaches, community led supports, and sort of layering and looping learning processes and
Hmm.
connecting to learn from each other.
I
In
see.
one
So cross
county,
training.
yeah, and so in one county, they reduced youth suicide and suicide attempts by 98%. They reduced like high school dropout rates by 50%, juvenile justice system involvement, teen pregnancy, like all of these different factors, by addressing the core root of trauma, essentially, and making sure that the community was bought in and empowered to lead the process.
Hmm.
All of those changes that occurred wound up developing a cost avoidance for the state of over $1 billion. So there was
Oh my goodness.
a 35x return on investment that was documented
We need to
in this study.
connect you with the Family Justice Center network who's did this with interpersonal violence and more and better efficient collaborative stuff that sounds like the same type of, it's a change in the in the system delivery. It's a complete change, so it is bottom up and top down.
Yeah,
And
and
I see what you're saying.
yeah, I've always said that when we have a bottom up and top down approach where
Mhm.
it meets in the middle, that's when our
Mhm.
society is going to flourish, right? We need to align and coordinate and support
Mhm.
across all levels. And I think that to what you just said at the end of the day, what we are working toward is a fundamental paradigm shift in the way that we operate and orient our systems to better support, to use your language from earlier, the human experience of what we all go
Yes.
through, and to work to really reweave the social fabric and create communities that better support people to reach their full potential, to thrive in their lives at an individual, family, community, and as we
And
do
that
that
is through
broader social level.
understanding. That is through educating, understanding, seeing, acknowledging the effect of trauma
It's
in
got to be a part of it.
community and life. A book that comes up is The Politics of Trauma by Stacey Haynes. If that's right up this alley. But I have a question. What are the efforts, if any, I hope there are some, in the improvement of trauma-informed coverage of interpersonal violence, of addiction, of mental health struggles in the media? And has there been any approach to, the media? I'm putting in my quotes in my hand, um, because we know that when there is um, media coverage and articles and statements made of the outside, what happened, the behavior, the responses to pain, that in and of itself can result in a story that is re-traumatizing to survivors. And so I have a big push to increase trauma-informed policies and practices for media and interviewers and everything that may put a picture on a tragedy.
Yeah.
So are there
So
any efforts in that area?
yeah. So two to mention, and a lot more needs to be done. But my another colleague, Laura Braden, who serves as our lead of communications, she put together a trauma informed journalism toolkit that
Oh,
works to
that's
discuss
fantastic.
some of the components of what you were just discussing, even in addition to the interview itself. Um, how we
It's
follow up, where we're not just exploiting
okay.
people's stories, but we're caring. And then out of that, we interviewed a longtime media correspondent on our podcast, Tamara Cherry. And so there's an episode of our podcast that is discussing trauma informed approaches to journalism as well. Again, there's and media. There is more that needs to be done. And I know that
Okay, that
I
is
apologize
right
again
up.
for spending so much time talking about my own story so that we don't
No,
have the time
that
to
is
talk about
right up my
CTIPP as much.
alley. And
But we have
no,
been, we recognize the need and have begun to, with our limited capacity that we hope to grow and
okay,
to be able
you
to
got
do
me on
more.
that team. You got me on that team, Jesse. I meaning I'll do whatever I can. Again, turning the tragedy that in my interpersonal struggles were highly publicized, and it was part of a threat from the person who was abusing me to publicize them. And I now have shifted it all into finding the truth as you did and trying to encourage those trauma informed um, approaches in journalism through my own story. So we crossed roads for a reason, and any way that I can support CTIP's efforts in that way, um, I would be honored.
I
And I
appreciate
think we
that.
will do another episode on just that with
Yeah.
your colleague.
Thank you
Now,
for sharing your story. And if I can just say, because I know that we need to wrap up
absolutely say
really
whatever
quickly,
you
I
want.
think so. Your powerful story of why this matters to you so much, mine and so many others. If we can, we are working to build the movement that allows for everybody's diverse lived experience and community context to show up to help shape the ways that our systems are better informed about the real experiences and impacts of the systems, as well
Yes,
as what the solutions may look like. And so that's where, in particular, our community advocacy network, CTIPP Can, is a free resource that anybody can join to join the movement. We mobilize around legislation and, again, support the development of a network and try to teach and support those trauma-informed approaches to advocacy. And so that powerful story of why this is so important to you, why you mobilize around change, and myself as well. CTIP wants to create the network that allows for everybody's experiences that help shape the human experience and broader systems experiences, to bring those together to generate a very powerful movement that transforms society toward a trauma-informed future.
I am so overwhelmingly grateful that our roads crossed, because it often feels that we're alone, but we're not. And in wanting to make that change, and everything that you're doing, everything that CTIP is doing and that you personally are doing is so inspiring and enlightening. And if I can support any of it through the work that I do and help spread the word, but also build, you know, just do outreach, especially on the trauma informed journalism, any way that I can support you and CTIP, I am right there. And thank you so much again for the work you do and for sharing your story and
Thank you,
transforming
Nadia.
your own struggles into something so powerful.
I appreciate that. Thank you as well.
Thank you. You are not alone. If you are dealing with shame and trauma, please reach out to me through my website, nadia-davis.com. You can get a free Ban Shame tip sheet and find out about upcoming events. I'd love it if you picked up my book, Home is Within You, wherever books are sold. If you like this podcast, please tell a friend, leave a review, and make sure to follow me on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Sending warm hugs.